So I love talking about the difference between early childhood trauma and trauma, let's say in adulthood. Of course, we know trauma is trauma. We don't want that for anyone. We have to address trauma regardless of age, right? But I also think it's really interesting when we begin to understand the different impacts of childhood trauma versus trauma that happen in adulthood. So, for instance, a lot of my experience has been working in the foster care space. And we know that a lot of kiddos, there's plenty of information out there on this. A lot of kiddos who experience foster care and go through the system have higher levels of PTSD or just as robust levels of PTSD than war veterans, right? Adult men and women coming back from war. And we've got the studies that show that. Now, a difference, though, is that when the men and women who go to war and they experience these horrible things that we can't even imagine, right? These things that impact the way everything in their body is functioning or processing the incoming stimuli, or, right, the emotions, the problem solving, all of these things impact them, right? Of course, we know that. We've seen the repercussions of what it's like to go and have those really horrible experiences and come back to normal society and the struggle there. We get that. Now, a difference is that their brains are already developed, right? Or they are farther in their development, because we know some young people go and have these experiences too before maybe their brain is fully developed. But what we know is when it's in childhood, when all of that development is really robust and it's happening so much every day, right? Especially in those first few years of life, we know that those first 3 years, so much is happening. We get that. It's like our brains are sponges, right? We're learning language, we're learning cognitive skills, we're learning motor skills, the fine and the gross motor skills. We're learning social skills and what our emotions are. There's so much happening. So when a trauma happens at that point in someone's development, it is now disrupting and distorting their development because their brains are sponges, their bodies are growing so much, right? And so when something comes in as a trauma, some kind of domestic violence within the home, some kind of removal from the home, again, in a lot of my experience being in foster care, some kind of unsafe situation, well, that disrupts now the way their brain starts processing things. Right? And so I think that's a really important, right? That's called developmental trauma versus just trauma. There's a whole new conversation in the last several years about, oh, this impact is different. If I'm a 30-year-old who goes and has this really traumatic experience when my body and my brain is generally fully developed versus a 5-year-old when everything is still forming, all of the foundations of my relational ability, my biology is still developing, right? My social skills, my relational skills, my ability to trust people, my ability to think, to feel my feelings, all of that is still being developed. And so there is a different impact. Again, let me be clear, both are bad. This isn't an argument of one being better than the other. It's just that there are differences for us to be mindful of. So, for a child who was 5 years old and experienced a very traumatic experience, let's say now we're engaging with them as their babysitter or as a family member or someone in our community, or they're in our school class or our kids' classroom or whatnot. Now they're maybe 10 or 15 years old. And maybe there's just some quirks. There's some, we notice some different behaviors. We notice the way they process things or express their emotions or whatnot. We would expect that because, to a degree, their ability to process that was disrupted by trauma early on. And so we need to be mindful of how do we help support and scaffold in the rebuilding of some of that. So it's just something for all of us to be mindful of, that we've got to really lean in and pay attention and be curious for the best ways to support a child who had some disrupted development due to trauma, right? We may need some extra maybe speech therapy. We may need some extra, maybe counseling, talk therapy, or play therapy just to help them process hard things. We may need some extra occupational therapy to help their body process sensory intake and what it feels like in their body to feel feelings or have this sensation, right? And so that just looks different than an adult who's experienced something truly traumatic that also needs to be addressed. The approach is going to be different. The impact is going to be a little bit different just due to their level of development when that trauma happened.